It is 7 p.m. We are here at Beaconside Farm at the Tavern to convene the first meeting of the Article 30 Bylaw Modernization Committee. My name is George Camo, and I am a temporary chair for the purposes of convening tonight's meeting. We will organize a little later in the evening and select a chair, a vice chair, and a clerk. But for the purposes of just kicking off the meeting, I thought we could take some time and just introduce all of ourselves to each other and get a sense of the board. We are a board that was created by annual town meeting by vote of Article 30 at the last annual town meeting. And as part of that, the moderator selected some citizens at large, and the bylaw also called for the mandatory filling of some seats from some key boards in the community on the administrative or bureaucratic side. So we're a balance of both working professionals who support the town day to day and citizens who support the town through our votes and our support for the community at town meeting and at other boards. By way of introduction, I'll just quickly introduce myself, and then we'll go right around. I was born here. I serve as chair currently of the Community Preservation Committee. I'm president of the Historical Society. I also serve on the Historical Commission and serve on a variety of other boards in the community. I've been active in the community for quite some time and have really enjoyed living in this community and living in this town and really experiencing all the great things that Canton is about. It's an honor to be here. I know that more than 70 individuals wrote letters in support to try to be on this committee, which I think shows the passion that people have for Canton, and I think we represent that passion for the people of Canton, for the employees of the town. So for me, it's an honor to be here tonight, and I really look forward to joining all of us together in this capacity. We will be working for 2 years on this project. There are 2 milestones built into this. One milestone is next year at the annual town meeting, where we will report out how our first year has gone, and even have the ability to make some recommendations to town meeting in the form of articles at that particular time. And then ultimately the article calls for a full report and full recommendations in the following town meeting. So it's a 2-year path to work on this. I'll have a little bit more to say about that in a few minutes, but before we get in too deep, I thought we could sort of go around and introduce ourselves to each other. Who would like to start? I will defer to Ms. McGonigal. Please.
I'm Gilda McGonigal. I live in Worcester and have lived in Canton for almost 40 years. I retired from Verizon Communications, had responsibilities in marketing, business development, project management, product development, which for us in Verizon is software, because that's our product. And I very much look forward to participating, and excited. This is the first committee I've been on, so I don't know the ins and outs of meetings and conduct and procedure, so I'm sure you'll correct me.
I won't correct you, but I'll help. We'll all help. So that's great. Thank you and welcome. Dr. Crane?
Yeah, my name is Bill Crane. In my professional life, I'm the executive director of a research center at Boston University. Probably the newest resident on the at-large citizen group, but certainly a passionate resident of Canton and really love the town. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and we love having her here and raising her in this town. So this is my first kind of committee or foray, so to speak, into town politics here in Canton, but looking forward to working with all of you and doing the town work.
Well, welcome. Mr. McAuliffe.
Paul McAuliffe. I've lived in Canton for almost 8 years now. Moved into a development right next to Randolph, and I have 3 children, 3 beautiful children that we're raising here. Worked for the Department of Correction for 17 and a half years now in a variety of roles. Victim services, security, classification, programming, all kinds of things. And I'm here to try to learn a lot. I want to participate, but I do want to learn a lot and advocate for Canton as best I can.
And you've also created some pretty amazing legislation through the Commonwealth, so we appreciate the bills you've tried to put forward. Thank you for that. All right, Ms. Camilli.
My name is Jen Camillion. I am here representing the town administrator, appointee. I worked in the executive office in the town of Canton for almost 20 years in progressively more authority roles. And I was recently appointed as the assistant town administrator. And I grew up in Canton as well, so I've been here my whole life, very passionate about Canton, and I'm also looking forward to working.
Welcome. Mr. Scollins.
Randy Scollins, Finance Director for the Town of Canton. I'm an outsider. I don't live in the Town of Canton. I've been in this role as Finance Director for about 5 years, and 15 years prior to that, another community in Foxborough. So 20 years in municipal government as Finance Director is my fourth career. And I am very much interested in this committee and seeing if we can't truly modernize what the structure of our government is here in town.
And you've been through this before in other communities.
In Foxborough, I started there 20 years ago after the town adopted a brand new charter approved by the legislature, moving from a town administrator form of government to a town manager form of government. And so we were working through the initial growing pains of that change. And I realized that's not what this is, because you would need a charter commission to do that. This is sort of a precursor to that.
Thank you for your time and being here and your service to Canton. Dr. Harrington.
I am Sue Harrington. I am a veterinarian. I owned the Randolph Animal Hospital for 27 years, sold it a couple of years ago, but I still work there. So now I'm just an employee. My husband Rob and I have lived in Canton for 27 years. We have 3 now adult children who all came through the Canton Public Schools. Big fan of the Canton Public Schools. And my other job is I am a costume designer for the high school drama club, and I do the Hanson shows too. So that's my other little side gig. But I'm very honored and very pleased to be here.
Thank you for being here. And Mr. Juniors.
Yes, Louis Jutras, the Information Systems Manager for the Town of Canton. As Randy said, I do not live here either. Transplant from Rhode Island, and been up here for a good number of years, about 20-something years. I worked in the city of Fall River 4 years prior to coming to Canton back in 2000. Been here for almost 25 years. I've also served on the Board of Assessors in Stoughton, where I live, for 11 years. So interacting with all the different departments in all these different situations and practices, and definitely want to get into this process and see what we can do for changes.
And you bring great technology to us, which I'm sure we will need as part of this. I will also point out that there is one other member, the chairman of the select board will be joining us. And Mr. Laughlin was unable to be here tonight, but we will bring him up to speed. He will be joining us at future meetings for sure. But the breadth of experience that each one of us brings, I think, is really exciting, and really sort of sets us off in a strong direction. And when I talked to Mr. Stady about this, all we have before us are the words on the page, is the motion that passed at town meeting that didn't have a lot of information in it. And I think, as Mr. Scollins had pointed out earlier, not a lot of meat on the bone, sort of figure out what this is and what it isn't. And I do think that the observation that it's not a charter commission is correct. And as folks may know, communities in Massachusetts are chartered. There's a physical charter that is voted by the legislature. Ours dates to 1797 and is still in place from 1797. Other communities resurrect those charters and do full-scale charter commissions to bring and modernize their government. And that might mean they're changing from one form of government to another. They may be changing from a regular town meeting to a representative town meeting. They may be going to a town council or city council. They may be changing the mechanics of their power structure. They do that through a change in the charter. That's not what this group is. This group is looking at our bylaws, which live within the charter, under the charter. The charter authorizes us to create the bylaws. Our bylaws, if you've taken a peek at them, and some of us certainly will notice that there's some pretty archaic stuff in there. The spitting on the ground, the horses at the trough, every town has those. But there's also anomalies that make it more difficult for us to function today, such as electronic, the question if we ever want to do electronic voting, or if we wanted to understand who can vote and who can't vote based on residency. Do you have to live in the community to manage the community? All sorts of questions that we will have to go through and talk a little bit about and see, is this what we would recommend? We are a recommending board. We can't change anything. Town meeting has to change, but we will make recommendations based on thoughtful deliberation and study and conversation with people, and maybe even some experts to help us to get best practices so that Canton has a sense of really having the best government it can have in this day and age. So that's sort of the foundation of this, but digging a little deeper, I think it was important. I had a method to my madness in terms of doing the election last, because I wanted the ability to bite into this for just a little bit, even if it's just for the first hour, to be a chair and say, okay, let's start a direction. And I thought it would be helpful for us to hear from the proponents who wrote the article, because it went by town meeting, fairly quickly with some discussion, but it wasn't the firebrand discussion that we had heard on other touch point articles that in some cases have divided the community. In other cases, you see all sorts of articles that go through town meeting that are, you just sort of flow through. You wonder, what was that? And the biggest one is the budget, when we just literally in moments vote millions of dollars. And so this wasn't quite that, but it's close. And I thought it would be important to hear from the folks who helped write this. And I would like to, if it's all right with this board, to hear from those folks. Is everybody okay with that part of the agenda, to hear this next presentation?
Absolutely.
And full disclosure, I did speak with this group ahead of time to both manage expectations for us tonight, to give them a time limit, and really hear a little bit more that would help me think, and then bring this information to all of us tonight. But there was no deliberative portion of that discussion. It was more listening and fact-finding. And so I want them to now present that fact-finding to this group here tonight. And so I don't know who's going to speak, but it looks like Ms. Thomas is going to. And at the time, you were chair of the Finance Committee when this came before us. Are you still chair?
I am not.
All right. So, but at the time, you were chair and had a heavy hand in helping draft this. And would you introduce your colleagues as well?
Sure. So I'm Cindy Thomas. I'm a member of the Finance Committee. And as Mr. Cole said, I, at the time, was the chair of the Finance Committee. So I'm here this evening representing the Finance Committee. I know Tom and Jen are going to talk a little bit more from their perspective as citizens and voters who supported the article. A couple of things I just want to say. First of all, I want to thank you folks for volunteering. I have to say, I thought about throwing my hat in the ring. I know how much work it takes to do this kind of work, what it takes to be on committees, to serve in these roles. And I wanted to say thank you to all of you for stepping up and taking on that commitment. Because I think those of us who've done this work don't take that lightly. I think first things I want to say is there is a rumor out there that this is an outgrowth of the special town meeting. And that in fact is not correct. There's been a lot of conversation about needing to take a look at our bylaws, both informally and in more formal ways for a number of years. I can think of many times when in Finance Committee meetings, something would come up and we'd have gee, we should update that, or that should get changed. There's been just informal conversations. I can sat with Jen and with Charlie Duty, and it's like, yeah, we should look at that. And so I think that the discussion about the need to have a committee like this has been something that has been growing. I think we've seen things, for example, like A recent change to move back to a central building and maintenance department, for example, that required a bylaw change. Another example of something that came up more recently that we looked at was the electronic voting. And I think when that came before the finance committee in this most recent preparation for town meeting, it was really apparent that it wasn't just one part of the bylaw that needed to get changed in order to do electronic voting. It had implications for multiple parts of the bylaw, and we couldn't just piecemeal it. Finance committee, there's inconsistencies all throughout the bylaw about the role of finance committee. We made a change at this last town meeting to kind of clean up one piece of that language, but it's another example of something that needed really much more consistent attention to have. Over here it says we must comment on everything in the warrant, and then over here it said, but you must only do this, which is it? And then, of course, George, as you mentioned, there's things that are just completely outdated. And so I think for the finance committee, we looked and said the bylaws are really important in terms of how this town goes about its business, and it really needs to be updated so we have the tools that we need in order to go forward. As we develop the article, you might say, well, why did you just have a bylaw review? But there are aspects of our bylaws that are about governance. And so we felt like it was important to call that out. I think we're also hope that this might pave the way for further work around the charter, for example, down the road. I think it's clear that we have things that need to be looked at going on as we go down into the future. And hopefully, as this group goes about its work, some of those may be parking lotted for this group because it's not within the scope of its work, but may well set the stage for our future work. As we talked to town council about this particular article, and we had back and forth as a finance committee about what he thought it should look like and what we thought it should look like, he proposed work that would go in stages. Bylaw review, taking multiple steps, that everything couldn't necessarily happen all at once. So I would envision that this group may end up with a report to the town meeting in 2026 that says we might need a charter commission because we may have bigger issues that we need to look at. Those aren't for me to say. I hope that one of the things that this group will do, and I think some of the vagueness is both an opportunity and a risk, but that it's one of the opportunities is to open it up and get input from the voters of our community on what the issues are that are important to them, what directions they'd like to see. I think there's an important opportunity here, and it's also one of the reasons why, I'll be honest, the town council wanted us to make this a smaller committee, wanted fewer citizens at large on the committee, and we pushed back on that because we felt like it was very important, yes, to have our town employees be involved. They know a lot about what goes on in town hall, a lot about how government works and functions in town hall, but we also need our voters at the table to really be providing input about how they want their town to run and how they want this community to function. And so we felt strongly that there had to be strong input from our voters at large, and that's why it is a bigger committee than town council recommended. So, I won't say much more there as much as to say that I think that this is an exciting opportunity and a great time. We did budget some money, whether it'll be enough or not. It's, there, it's $20,000, 22, thank you. The man who holds the keys to the checks.
Yes.
22 we ended up with, yes, thank you. And so there are organizations out there that do this work. We've already had conversations in an exploratory way, not making any commitments, but when you go about this work, you want to kind of get a sense of, are we going down the right path as we begin to think about the article, about the resources we have. And so the McCormick Institute, based at UMass Boston, does this kind of work. They are available and they do this work with cities and towns all the time. And so, sometimes I feel like if you go to groups that do this work, they can get at it much more quickly because they've looked at bylaws all the time. They've got recommendations, they've got samples, they know how to do it. But there are other groups that do it as well. Mass Municipal Association. So hopefully, as committee, that you'll also have some resources, and some expertise that you can bring to the table. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have questions about, where the finance committee came from. It is challenging when you write town meeting articles because many of us would like them to be longer and more expansive with more detail. They tend to get compressed and language gets tightened or tightened isn't right. It gets shortened. Let's put it that way. Because it's not tight.
Shortened.
It's not the right word. Shortened. And so, but that gives you a lot of room, right? Flexibility. So that's kind of where we.
Well, we appreciate that preamble to your presentation, and thank you for your service. That's one committee, I don't know how the finance committee does it. It's amazing. It also, bears some observation that just like the federal government, and there being branches of government, we too, here in the town, have two branches of government. And it's not as apparent, but there is an administrative branch and a legislative branch. And town meeting is the legislative branch. The people, we, the folks that were appointed by the moderator, are on the legislative side. The finance committee is also on the legislative side. In other words, we craft the legislation. It gets voted by the legislature and then carried out by the administrative branch, in this case, the select board and the various agencies that report to the select board. So there is a balance of power in our community. And there's also a third branch of government, the judiciary, and we sort of have that in the zoning board of appeals, but not to the same extent that there is on the federal level. But this was crafted, the legislation here was crafted through almost a unanimous vote of the finance committee and a pretty unanimous vote at town meeting, as I recall.
And we also have the support of the select board.
Correct. Yeah.
Which I do think is important. While it did come through the legislative
That's
side
right.
of the house, I think, we wanted the select board support.
That's right.
I think they see the need for this.
And there's representation from both sides on this committee, which is really good. Are there questions for the finance committee?
I actually have a question. And I know much of this is going to be for us to decide and to figure out as a group, but did you have a vision of taking each bylaw or was there some prioritization that you can share with us? Or is anything that we ought to be tackling first?
We did not go through the bylaw in that level of detail, and so I think we would look to this group to sort of figure out what you want to tackle and what you want to prioritize. I think that there are going to be some things that are housekeeping. When you go through the bylaw, you'll see things that don't even have anything in them anymore, right? They can disappear. There's things that are going to be easy. There's also going to be housekeeping things, like our bylaw doesn't have a table of contents. It isn't now, you can't navigate it. It's a old PDF that you can't really search very easily. It's very clunky as a document. So there's going to be some really low hanging fruit. But I think, I think it would be up to this group to begin to go through that document and say, what do we want to prioritize? What are some of the most important issues? And that may also, we know, for example, electronic voting is something that's important to the community. That might be something, I'm not here to say, this is Cindy Thomas personally speaking, not finance committee, because we didn't put any money in the budget for electronic voting. But it may be something we might say, we want to make sure we have that in place for 2026. So what do we need to do to get that ready? I would say that you may want to look and say, what are the most pressing issues for our community, and do we prioritize those first? Maybe the one about junk dealers isn't super important right now. I don't know how you want to make your decisions, but I think those are the community's decisions.
You're also going to see sections where decision-making isn't clear. The water and sewer area, for instance, there's some financial impact of some of the commissions where some of the power structure is sort of either unclear or bifurcated or needs to be called out. So we can talk about those things, we can see what other practices are, and then just make recommendations. We think a best practice is this, And then town meeting can decide whether or not to adopt that as part of the new bylaws. So you're gonna hear some thorny things along the way, and then you're gonna hear some codification and the low-hanging fruit, as you put it, but it is the gamut, and if you look at them, they're all over the map, because they grew like weeds on a garden, they were just sort of appended each year, and they were not structured, and so but not only the numbering system, but just even the classification, the sections for town meeting, finance committee, executive.
They bounce all over the place. And I would also suggest that our town employees who are on this committee already probably have sort of a list of things that they would love to see tackled.
That help them do their job.
Right, you know, so, you know, that would be, my guess is if you were to touch with each of our town employees, they already have some things that they.
So a couple of them
know.
have sent them, and I did not share those with the committee, and I read them and then put them away. I said, this is for the committee, but
Right.
some of you have sent some recommendations along, we should do this, and this is the point at which we get to all do it together, you know,
And to me, that's part of the value of this committee, is to really be able to work together to say, what are those priorities? What's the balance between what our citizens at large feel are priorities, our town employees see as priorities? That, you know, that's the richness of a committee like this.
Other questions for Ms. Thomas before I know you have a presentation, so if there are no other questions, and we'll be here for a little bit, so we can go back to them. Mr. Birmingham, are you presenting?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, everybody. And to echo Cindy's point, thank you for doing this. Appreciate it. The town is going to benefit from this very much. So Jen and I, we're going to kind of do a little bit of a tag team. I'll run through the slides pretty much. We want to do a quick introduction of ourselves, and then we'll just run through purpose, background, overview, and committee considerations to give you all some insight into what we were thinking as citizens that worked on this petition or this article. So real quickly, my background, I'm a retired executive, former energy regulator, and my degrees in resource economics. As my last role for private sector was vice president of corporate compliance. So I've got a lot of experience with dealing with compliance, governance, and risk-related issues. My focus professionally was on helping companies avoid fines and penalties, changing management processes, and continuous improvement, and then helping strategies stick. So there's a lot of tools and techniques that are involved in those three areas that I think provided me some insight and background for recommending some of what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm currently an active community member here in town, founder of the Farmers Market. I chair 2 committees, and I'm also on the Conservation Commission, and just spent a lot of time researching this subject in anticipation of town meeting, and once that was approved, trying to put some more meat on the bones as we're talking about. So that's a quick background for me.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm quite delighted to be here with all of you tonight. Thank you for this opportunity. And it's impressive just hearing you go around and introduce yourselves and what I know about each of you as well. This is such an opportunity for our town, what you're embarking on, and I'm grateful. My name is Jennifer Wexler, and I've lived in Canton now for about a dozen years. What I have in common, I think, with all of you is that I care deeply about this town, and that, my family lives here, and I have put a lot of effort through volunteer activities to help make things go well within Canton. I think we all see the tremendous strengths here in Canton and the successes, and we want to see continuous improvement. And this is a great opportunity for that. I'm here tonight because I was part of helping to channel the momentum that led to the successful passage of Article 30. And I want to tell you just a little bit more about myself and where I'm coming from. I left my last full-time job with the City of Boston in 2019, where I worked in human resources. for the city for 30 years and had the opportunity to work with all 52 departments on policy, on various issues to help improve the functioning of the city of Boston and the opportunity for workers. We did a lot of interesting work that I have carried forward, and one of the last pieces, which was about continuous improvement and modernization, including how to really do massive community engagement. And I appreciate Cindy mentioning, and I have heard from others of you, the importance of having that interactive process as you move forward to, you're going to be making progress, and then you get, interaction from community members, and that will help you in directing the good work that you'll be doing. I have done a bunch of volunteer work here in Canton, and including in particular towards advancing a sustainable future. And you've probably seen some of my impact and the groups that I've worked with around civic engagement, and including successive town meeting modernization issues via warrant articles, plastic bag reduction at point of purchase, the enabling language for municipal energy aggregation, which Tom carried over the finish line with the Canton Electricity Choice, and the Climate Action Plan Steering Committee, which I serve on as the alternate chair. And I've worked closely with our Senator Paul Feeney and our Representative William Galvin around these issues. I have had hundreds of conversations with Canton residents, Canton officials, those of you who work for the town of Canton, many youth, around what they're concerned about and what are the modernization issues that are important to them in terms of the efficiency and well-functioning of our town and a better future for everyone across all sectors. So because of those conversations, I really understood the need and significance and the opportunity to stand in support of Article 30. And consequently, Tom and I worked together, as we have on many issues here in the town, to make the article known and understood widely, and thus were part of its successful passage.
Thank you both. Okay, let's dive in. Next slide, please. So real briefly, purpose, help summarize the rationale behind Article 30 and to support this committee's work. Background, next slide, please. We covered a bunch of this already, so some of it's a little duplicative. I apologize. Let's just rip through it. General bylaws do not appear to have been comprehensively reviewed in years. I didn't know it was back to 1797.
That's the charter.
True. Okay,
Some of them do not present.
Yeah, fair enough. There are currently inconsistencies. We talked about that discussion of modernizing these bylaws. It's been percolating for a couple of years. The Finance Committee introduced, Select Board unanimously approved. And the Article 30 only includes a review of bylaws under the Select Board's jurisdiction. I think that can be narrowed to the general bylaws, not the zoning bylaws. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, overview of the rationale. So in part, Jen, the work that we were doing and supporting Cindy in the effort of the Finance Committee, we were trying to help prioritize high value, high priority, and lower cost changes through this particular article. We reflected stakeholder input. We're hoping to improve Canton's municipal operational efficiency and effectiveness, how the town delivers its core services, increasing trust in our local government by increasing access and engagement. The bylaws are an entryway into people's engagement with the government. If they don't trust or understand the bylaws, they're going to have trouble trusting government, in my opinion at least. Have a positive impact on the quality of life for all Canton residents. Focus on changes that can be reasonably implemented in the shorter term. We've sort of had quite a bit of discussion already tonight on, there may be a parking lot that would be better for issues that may take longer term. We were hoping to try to have some quicker wins, and we've heard the term low-hanging fruit tonight. I think there's plenty to do, and one of the prioritization criteria would be easily implemented, relatively easily. And then obviously, being the compliance guy, we just have to make sure any proposed changes are compliant with applicable legal and regulatory requirements. Next slide, please. So a couple of committee considerations. I've done a number of these kinds of exercises, both in industry and here now for the town. I think it's helpful to consider some guidelines and guiding principles as you consider what to prioritize and what to focus on. So I just wanted to present the bottom 4 bullets are some examples to help you think through how to prioritize and decide what to focus on. So ensuring the bylaws are clear, concise, logically organized, easily accessible, and understandable for all stakeholders, including residents, businesses, and municipal staff. Prioritize bylaws that ensure service provision and access directly impact public safety, health, infrastructure, and quality of life issues identified through community feedback and data analysis. Third one, promote consistency in bylaw application across different geographic areas and demographic groups within Canton. And finally, designing bylaws that are flexible and adaptable to accommodate evolving circumstances, technological advancements, and changing regulatory environment. I'll stick on that one for a second, a little color. Cindy had referenced sometimes you don't want the bylaws too specific, and sometimes you don't want them too general. If they're general, it gives you some flexibility and opportunity to interpret. Some specificity, they may need to change more frequently. So when you're talking about legislation, laws are generally more generalized, regulations are more specific. So these are our bylaws. Maybe the opportunity here to consider is striking a balance between specificity and generality. Okay, next slide, please. A couple more considerations. Just kind of thinking through, going through the list and talking to folks and, what are the top priority critical municipal functions? This isn't meant to be all-inclusive, but when you go through the list, the ones that are most public-facing, I think that touch the citizens, typically most directly, public safety, emergency services, infrastructure, basic services, and utilities. What do we get in the mail from the town, the citizens? We get our water bill. Public health, obviously an important issue there. Housing and community development, that's obviously a critical issue nationwide. Trying to deal with that. Cultural and social services, this is, the classic, how do we build our culture in this community? What kind of engagement opportunities do we have for the public? And then finally, government administration and finance, obviously 2 critical aspects of municipal functions. And last substantive slide, please. A couple of things to think about is the process. Again, having gone through this a couple of times, there are some basic steps that I think might help you as you go through the, how are we going to figure this out? I had a basic idea of a 3-step benchmarking. Start with making a list of what your bylaws look like and create basically a matrix that can identify, current state, and then start looking at other communities that have done this. It's great to know, Randy, you were involved in Foxborough. Obviously, it's a little different on the charter, but some stuff comes up. Sharon has recently done this. I've had a conversation with one of the members of it was a charter commission, but he gave some good thoughts and advice on the process to go through. Cindy mentioned the McCormick Institute. They have professional staff that do this for a living. And one of the recommendations is to do some benchmarking analysis to be able to compare and contrast the current state versus potential future state. What are other towns doing? For those of you that may not know, Canton has a sort of a cohort of 12, generally 12 different communities that we compare ourselves against in different aspects. and I did a little research in Norfolk County. We've got a couple of different forms of government in Norfolk County, but there's a few towns that are similarly sized, similar socioeconomic, and we're open town meeting, which means everybody gets up and has a chance to vote at town meeting. So just essentially, in summary, it would be kind of creating this matrix that compares and contrasts, and then using some criteria to prioritize. What are the most important elements that you want to include in the decision-making process? And a few slides earlier, I was thinking, those 4 bullets are things to consider, how to prioritize. Roles and responsibilities, there are a bunch. Obviously, anybody, Jen, Rainey, do you know how many town employees there are in total?
Including school?
No, just under select board jurisdiction.
About
350.
Yeah, so that's a lot of people doing a lot of work and trying to figure out what their roles and responsibilities are. There are a couple of critical roles and responsibilities that, I've identified doing the work that I do in town. Just obviously the select board, town council, town administrator, town moderator, finance director, finance committee. I'm probably missing a couple in there, but there are some key roles and what are their responsibilities. Maybe start with that and think about, okay, how do they do their job and how do the bylaws help them do their job more effectively, and or could it be done, restructured to help them be more effective and efficient? And then finally, tools and technology. We're looking at a lot of, in some of the committees, and Lois has been fantastic in helping us figure out just how to do a meeting like this. You need equipment, you need the notice, you need the cable TV helping record this and give the town opportunity to comment. You'll see all kinds of opportunities, I think, in the bylaws when you start dissecting them for new tools and technology. I would say, and I'm sure Louis would echo this, technology comes with cost though. You have to buy it and then you have to maintain it. And there's a change management piece that's also challenging for people to get used to. So it's not a panacea, but I think there are some interesting tools and opportunities out there to help improve community engagement. Like I know there's an effort afloat on streamlining permitting process. How do people that are applying for permits and all different kinds of permits in town, how can we streamline that process so it's not as much back and forth? And just giving folks a little more clarity on when they can expect a decision on their permit. So that's a pretty quick high-level overview. Hopefully that's useful. We're here to answer any questions and absolutely support your work 100%.
Thank you for this, and let's, any questions from folks?
I have a question. How did we arrive at this 22K number?
Sure.
And is that related to the consultant to be hired? Okay.
I'll take a shot at that.
Go for it. Because my brain is trying to go back to last November and December and think about where we came up with that.
So I'm doing some research for the article. As I mentioned, I had a chance to talk to the town of Sharon and the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC, is the sort of towns within essentially the 495 belt of Eastern Massachusetts. There's a state planning authority, MAPC serves those 100 towns, and they have professional planning staff that include staff that help on governance. So I reached out to their staff and said, hey, do you have experience doing this bylaw modernization? We're considering putting it into the annual town meeting. What can you tell us about it? So had a good conversation with 2 staff members, and they do this for other different towns. And they said, based on the circumstances that Canton is, we recommend getting in touch with McCormick Institute, which is what Cindy had mentioned earlier. So UMass Boston has this center, the McCormick Institute, that also is funded through the state, that provides governance among other things, lots of different services, but governance help for towns and cities in Massachusetts. So they have a professional staff that does this for a living. And one of the gentlemen that I spoke with gave me a couple of different resources to do some digging. That's how I educated myself on the different charters, that there's different kinds of charters that are available for the town. That's a topic for another day, but that was a good example of, there's some very knowledgeable resources. And then talking to them, back to your question, the $22,000 was a rough ballpark that the McCormick Institute said, you could hire us to basically do that gap analysis, that kind of matrix that we talked about, and help advise and consult this committee on that kind of process. So it's pretty low budget. They thought it might be a little tight, but we could probably do it in that at least the first round. So that's kind of how that number came.
Yeah, and I think we were originally at 20 and we upped it just a little bit to add a little bit more to it, so.
How these things go.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the challenge on that number will be if there's a lot of, because we also talked a little bit with the Master Plan Implementation Committee, and if you want a lot of community engagement and you want them to facilitate a lot, then that number could go up. I mean, I'm not saying that the finance committee is here going to be, can't speak for the finance committee. We haven't met on this. If, there's always that opportunity to look at next year's budget and town meeting, should there need to be more expansive. Hopefully not. The dollars are tight, but, that's where our starting point. And I think, that will be up to this group to scope out whether you need a consultant, and if you do, what the scope of work is within that budget parameter.
Well, and driving that scope will be critical because if that's the budget,
Right.
then the question is, can we talk to other sources if
Yeah.
we're close? So if it comes in at 25,
Yeah.
we talk to the select board. There are ways to augment that, but we would have to create a scope that is reasonable and matches some of the things that we're hearing tonight and what this committee feels. And that process, thank God Randy's here, because there is a procurement process and that takes time in and of itself, but that doesn't, mean we couldn't be doing other things while we're waiting for that process, community listening sessions or other,
And we're not here to suggest that you use McCormick. The advantage to McCormick, should you decide to go down that route, is that they are a state entity and you can, the town already has a relationship with them and you can do it through interagency service agreement
Yes.
versus having to go out to competitive bids.
So that's a
Oh,
quicker
that's
route,
huge,
actually.
So not to suggest that you should bypass a process, but, and certainly check with others, but if you were to go with them, there's an easy route there that's less complicated.
I have a question. So this consultant group, do they sort of facilitate discovery within the group? Because there are consultants that sort of lead you into self-determination, really, and there are others who come with sort of recommendations that, off the shelf, this is what we do in this town, this might fit in your town, rather than having you being led through a discussion among the committee, which is a little bit different because one allows us to be a little bit more autonomous. The other one, they sort of, convince us of their way. Do you know what I mean? So do you know which one they are or what they generally tend to do?
Well, you talk to them probably in more detail than I have, and I'm gonna, full disclosure here, I work for UMass Boston, so I don't work for the McCormick Institute and I have no financial benefit or gain.
Well, and I can also speak to MAPC,
Yeah.
because I served for many years on the planning board. We used and we still use MAPC services in this community, and we are self-determinative relative to their services. And those listening sessions and the collection of ideas is individual to us. Anytime we've ever used MAPC anyway, but I'm not familiar with McCormick.
Yeah, I'll let Tom comment, because
I
stay.
I would kind of separate the two buckets. I think of what you were getting at. One is more facilitative
Mhm.
and then more advisory.
Right.
And I think they can do both. From what I've talked to on this is the McCormick Institute.
Mhm.
I think they have the skills to do both.
And my impression from my conversations with them, aside from anything, was exactly that. They come with sort of a lot of experience with other cities and towns, so they have that in their back pocket. But at the same time, they want to know what is it that you're trying to do? So the expertise of, what has worked, what hasn't worked, is what they bring to the table. But I think that customization and what is it that we're trying to accomplish?
So I'm trying to understand when they will be brought into the process. Because in order to sort of understand what direction you want to go in, you really have to complete a lot of work on your own. And take those bylaws and take a look at them. And somehow we can probably come up with some way of prioritizing, so that the meat and potatoes is what we tackle first. But that requires, I think, a lot of discussion and a lot of back and forth. And then maybe you get the consultant at that point because they're able to maybe recommend how you can implement, for an example. But it would seem that if you engage them too early in the process, that you start to lose some of that discussion. It's my thought, that's all. But that probably for another time.
No, I think that's a good observation. I think that there will be a point at which when I'm not presupposing anybody did look at them or hasn't looked at them yet, but when you look at them, you're gonna see, oh, wow. I mean, that was, I hadn't looked at them in years. I mean, I look at my sections, right? And then when I looked at them in total, I was like, oh, wow.
Right.
And
It's world hunger.
right? It's right. It's totally world hunger. But then I made the mistake of going to look at Sharon's, and I was like, oh, this is so good. The way it all collapsed and opened, and I said, oh, that's where this is. There was just critical thinking that went into whatever Sharon had done, and I'm not saying that's where we go, but it's night and day.
Right.
Between the experience is night and day. So I think the answer might be somewhere in between, that we're gonna either feel overwhelmed pretty quick and need some help, or we're gonna say, oh, no, we got this. I was already overwhelmed when I first looked at it, particularly the water and sewer section, that section, and some of the rates charts and things where things were going. I know it's all important, but there's a lot there. So, other questions or observations? And we're gonna have a little discussion in a few moments, but while we still have these folks, and they're
Can we
working
get
stuff.
that?
Yeah, we will.
Yeah.
We'll have that. I advise we build a Dropbox or some sort of storage space for all of our work and all of our materials, so it's public facing, so that we can keep referring back to things like this, and there'll be more, I'm sure. So we'll get there.
Mr. Chair, one more observation, if I may, that might help kind of along these lines is, if you kind of do a screening of the bylaws with a certain lens of, okay, there's a hierarchy of documents that can help manage the town. For example, the law is usually the highest, then you go to regulations, then you go to policies, then you go to procedures, and then you go to guidelines. And there's a mix of what's in the bylaws of, you can just see that there's operational stuff in the bylaws that should be in either a policy or a procedure. And I think if you kind of go through that lens, take that first cut and sort of assess, okay, what is really the governance of the town and the roles and responsibilities that are really important? Okay, that's good, let's focus on that. And maybe pull some of the other things that would be better in different types of documents.
That's stunning too, because there's sometimes when, if it's a policy change that doesn't need to go before town meeting because the law is so clear, but it holds you back almost a full year from making a change on a policy because of the way it was structured originally. I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm just saying it does hinder the ability for some of our committees and commissions to do some of the work that they might need to do that's more critical. That really isn't a bylaw, but it was put in the bylaws. And once it's there, then it becomes much more difficult to make a change, through a year or a series of meetings. So that's an interesting observation. Other discussion points?
This might be a little cart before the horse, but, talking about changing this at town meeting, surely we're not gonna serve up each bylaw individually to be voted on. How do you do that? I mean, you create blocks of.
Well, the bylaw suggests very little in the sense other than a report next year.
Right.
But that also doesn't suggest that we couldn't create some changes by next year.
But even if we're talking about 26, I just want to understand the mechanics of how
It
that
may be a
happens.
wholesale, the planning board has done this in terms of zoning bylaws in the past, where they've said, okay, these are the changes, we're gonna redline everything, but we're moving to a whole new document. And here's where you can trace through the legislative history of the move, and then you present it with a new document. So we won't grow this as we had in the past, where we're just glomming things on. There will be a new set for the town to consider.
Okay.
And they will honestly, I believe, just, take it apart piece by piece and say, a lot of this is great, but we really don't like this. So we're gonna hold on this, and we're gonna just we'll have to come up with a glide path to allow for that, because we can't presuppose how they'll vote.
Right.
But we can give our best recommendations to this is what it should and could look like, and then let town meeting decide. And I honestly think if the process is really transparent and the public is engaged, it'll be a lot easier to have advocacy at town meeting when we have other people standing behind the ideas that come out of this group, both in terms of other town employees, but also the interested public. The one thing that I would hope we would consider, and I would recommend, is that we reach out to the 70 people who showed an interest and say, all right, we are now here, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. And so lay out a pathway to engage those people. And at the very least, thank them too. That's the other role I think we should do early on. Some people took the time to write a letter, and we need to thank them for that. So that's one thing that we can do early on to start building that support. This is going to take some time. There's a lot of work to be done. But it will be I believe, a transfer to a new set of bylaws.
Okay.
Would you agree? I mean, I know you're nodding, but I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think it's so, with all due respect, ripe for improvement that is the likely outcome is that a better organization. I'm thinking of what we did in my prior community is we implemented the code, which was, that may be what Sharon has, I don't know, but there's a hierarchy that's recognized in the state, and it's all electronic, and there's a vendor that manages it for you, and you provide any updates that happen at the town meeting to it. But it changes the organization to what I've heard some of you refer to as just way more intuitive than what we have. So I'm hoping that is one of the things that we move to, is an easily accessible document that is well organized, unlike what we have today.
Other thoughts? Just taking it in. We're all still just taking it in. Thank you. No, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for
Please.
inviting us to join.
Well, you can stick around. We have some housekeeping to do. And that is how we want to move forward, frequency of our meetings, days that we can meet. There's 9 of us, and sort of, I know that we all have competing schedules. I came very close this time to at least finding the stars aligned so that the majority of us could be here. And that's not going to necessarily be the case after the summer when all of our lives get filled up with everything else. So I do think we're going to need a standing date each month that we can at least calendar. There also could be, since we're a group of 9, there could be smaller subcommittees that could spin out, but we could, I'm just putting this on the table. I only am thinking that if we wanted to do a subcommittee that did engagement, or a subcommittee that did the prep for a contract or other services, there are possibilities that we could break some of this work up that report back to the full committee, so that we have a little bit more agility as opposed to just waiting every 30 days to get together. We are blessed by having some really strong town employees here as well, who are very good at helping us get things that we're going to need. If we wanted to see an org chart, for instance, for the community, and it doesn't exist on the website, it's tasking folks in your office, I suppose, to say, okay, what does it look like and how do these bylaws interplay? So I think that I'd like to get people's sense of frequency and we don't have to decide tonight, but what a next meeting would be in terms of timing for September. Because it sounds like it's a ways off, but really some of our work has to be done by January, because that's when the warrant will close, although we're only reporting. So if we wanted to put anything in the warrant, we have this deadline in December or so, right? Is it?
I think it was
Do
February.
it goes up in February,
It'll be the warrant will be open in December,
open in December, close in,
early January.
so there's, I know, right? I mean, so here we are.
Yeah.
Basically in September. Which shouldn't scare us. It's not, maybe there's not a lot we can do in that time, but we're gonna.
Can we stagger? Can we meet more frequently for a couple of months and then less frequently during December? Many of it, with the holidays and, you know, I mean, it just seems like
We could do,
maybe every 3 weeks at the beginning.
Yeah.
I don't know, that might be too much for some people, but
What
I
do
feel
people
like
think?
there's so much to be done.
I agree.
Yeah,
think
I like
monthly is
that.
probably
I like
good.
everything.
3 weeks is fine.
Two loose, so,
Mhm.
yeah, at least every 3 weeks.
that's a great idea. All right. And were they okay with the sort of polling and then we can schedule the next one through polling?
I
Or
think that's the most effective
Yeah.
in this day and age.
And my trigger is quorum based
Right.
with maybe one or two others. This one, although we offered additional dates, it didn't change anything by the time the additional dates were offered. And it turns out the first date got 8 people or so.
Are you suggesting putting
Just-
various dates out there and letting us?
Yeah, let's see if we can get the group, the
That seems
majority.
hard.
I'm
But
open to anything.
that's what the majority wants, so sometimes I like to know when it is so that I can plan around commitments, you know? but-
Sure, I know.
But that might be easier, so it's not
I mean,
just my thought.
no, I think it's a good point. Theoretically, the next meeting is going to be the second week of September, roughly, right? So the week of the 9th at some point. So, I mean, I could offer all those dates that
Yeah.
don't conflict. I want to make sure that Mr. Lawford is with us. So I have to also want to make sure whatever we do, we don't conflict with select board.
Right.
And finding a meeting space is not a problem. We can meet anywhere. So it's not an issue for if Concom was meeting that night, or we'll find meeting space. But if the next meeting is the week of the 9th, I could set up a series of dates in the calendar and see what people.
Does someone have a particular day in the week that never works?
Wednesday.
Wednesdays?
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right, Wednesdays
And
are
then,
right
and
then.
then you don't have
We can- we
Tuesday
can-
for.
Maybe we can
3 or
back
4
into
of
it.
us.
Select board.
Yeah, so Tuesday you lose, Wednesday you lose.
Right.
I know Monday's usually good for me. I usually have an issue on that.
And Monday worked out this time for most of us.
Yeah.
Monday, I'm sure.
That's Usually Fridays you don't have stuff, so.
Mondays are tough.
Can be tough,
Yeah.
yeah.
Can be or.
During like September, October, they are, yeah.
Did you say Monday?
Yeah.
And,
Which again gets back to why the polling kind of,
Yeah.
and I think also with, probably picking a week that the select board isn't meeting.
right,
Well, that's
Right, so
a
we pick the alternate week and then make dates available that week.
that
Find
gives
which
you
day
another
we have a
day you
quorum.
could add, yeah.
Right.
Well, let me try that at least, and then see if we can settle into something quick. I think yours is closer to the answer, but just to get that next meeting scheduled for 3 weeks from now, at least, we can do that. Would that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so there's that. And so now I would turn to the other question. When Mr. Stady asked me to be chair, I said, I'll be chair for the first meeting. He doesn't have the authority to appoint a chair that's standing for us. And so I would open the floor to nominations for chairperson, vice chairperson, and clerk. And I would introduce that would be for the 1-year term until after next town meeting. So we've got some continuity.
You want to give the members the layout,
Yeah,
not appointing yourself and being able to say no to it and all that.
but also
For those that don't.
responsibilities of those positions.
Well, So there's two lines of thoughts. There's the line of thought that the chair runs the meeting, and I think those are very well-established boards where they are having petitioners come before them and they're adjudicating, or and then there's working chairs. And this is a working committee. There's no question. This is largely going to be a working committee. The role of the clerk will be to take minutes and to be the person who posts the agenda. Our agendas have to be posted 48 hours in advance with the town clerk, to send notices to the newspaper and to cable so that the public is aware. Once we fall into a standing schedule, we can publish a standing meeting notice. And that can be, third Thursday of the month, et cetera, and that can be at the town clerk. So that is the position of the clerk. Vice chair sits in for the chair when the chair isn't there in terms of running the meeting, but essentially the chair, vice person, and the clerk help guide the rest of the work in this case of this committee. So,
Mr. Chair, do you want to proceed with these elections without all members present?
I do. I think that, again, we're going to run into this issue
Each meeting.
at each meeting.
Yeah.
Well, I don't imagine we're ever going to have 9 of us together for a lot of meetings. Just knowing all of our lives, hearing our schedules, hearing what we do in our day-to-day, things will come up. So I think we need to start tonight.
Can
Is
we
that okay?
nominate someone who's not here?
You certainly could. You
So
certainly
we
could.
just tell them they won?
Well, they don't like that, but that does happen. Well, he's not here. So yes, we can, any way we want to do this. They can always demur and say, I don't want it, but you can certainly do it.
Well, I nominate Mike Lochran.
Okay,
Second.
all right.
I would like to nominate George Camo because I think you have the most experience of anyone running these sorts of things. I think that would be very helpful.
So I will tell you this, I really want to do this actually. I have a master's in public administration and I love good government, and I think we've got a great government. And that's one of the reasons, if you read my letter to Mr. Stady, just getting here was, for me, a wonderful thing, but even just spending time thinking about this. So I would love to do it. I'm
I
honest
second
about it.
Mr. Camo.
But we now have competing nominations on the floor. And I'm okay with that. But I would like, whoever we choose, it to be unanimous. I would like us to start as a cohesive group. And so if it is the choice of Mr. Wofford, and it's unfair that he's not here, and I'm really apologizing for any discussion with him not being in the room. But he is chair of the select board and has a tremendous amount of support and backing at the select board. So
Maybe he would be an excellent vice chair.
what is the will of the board? We can take up your motion first, which will force us to vote, or you can withdraw your motion, and then we would go to the second motion. But your motion is first. And so I'm not saying what to do, so it's up to you guys. Do you want to move forward with your motion?
Sure.
Okay, a motion has been made and it has been seconded relative to Mr. Loughren as chair. Any further discussion on that matter? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
What was the vote?
I did say aye.
1, 2, 3?
Great.
The motion does not carry. We'll move to the second motion. And this is with great respect to Mr. Loughren. I really want to make that clear tonight, seriously. The second motion has been made and seconded for Mr. Camo to be chair until the next town meeting. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 1 against? 1, 2 against? 1, 2, 2 against. Okay, we'll record that vote. And I hope to earn your votes as time goes on. Thank you. All right, vice chair.
I nominate Mike Loughren for vice chair.
Motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Any further discussion?
I honestly didn't hear that.
Oh, Mike Loughren.
Mr.
Oh,
Loughren,
I
quite
see.
sorry. Yeah.
I heard it.
Very good.
Motion has been made, seconded, and thirded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
May I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Is this like a ranked choice voting system? How is this happening? Because we had, you know, a fragmented vote on the chair and.
It's a great question. In a vote in a town board, if a motion does not pass, or if it's tied, it doesn't pass, no action is taken. And so no action was taken on the first motion. We took a second motion and the majority of the board voted in favor, so that motion passed. In this case, you're free to vote all over fresh again, so that could be a unanimous vote or a bifurcated vote for Mr. Lawford, any way you want to vote on Mr. Lawford's vice chairmanship. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, because I know you had said you prefer it to be unanimous.
Well, I do. I like unanimity, particularly at the beginning, but I didn't get it, so that's okay. I'm just to sort of move through it.
But the weight still carries.
The vote still carries. Yeah. All right, so there's a motion made and seconded, and there has been some discussion on the matter. All those in favor of Mr. Lawford as vice chair, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That is unanimous. The final is for a clerk. So entertain a motion for clerk of the board. I'm not looking at you.
Thank you.
Would you? All right.
I would nominate Dr. Harrington since he sold your practice.
I still work full time. Nice try.
It's the most unenviable position. Mr. Jutras has indicated that he might be willing to do it. And yes,
I did minutes for 11 years for my other position, so
There you
that's fine.
it's largely minutes and helping us post.
I nominated Louis Jutras for clerk.
Second.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded for Mr. Jutras as clerk. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, wonderful. Saved you.
Thank you.
Yeah, right?
Thank you. I also did that for many, many years.
Yeah, you're not off the hook, but you're okay. Any other business before us this evening? Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just gonna toss out there, does it make sense to give an assignment for everybody to get a copy of the bylaws and maybe, I don't want to frame this, George, maybe you're the best person to frame it, but maybe pick out sections that you might be more familiar with or interested to look at in more detail for a future appointed subcommittee, just so we can start thinking about the bylaws, something like that.
I mean, I think it's a great idea. I also think, you know, when the question came as to sort of role of chair, vice chair, et cetera, and I will talk with Mr. Lawford about this as well. It's also helped sort of guide the work of the committee and make recommendations to the committee. Should we do it this way or another? I don't think it's heavy-handed at all. It's really to provide some level of leadership as we take on the task. So I think that, and I'm actually looking forward to that, because when Mr. Lawford was elected on the select board, he did spend some time studying the municipal government and the function of the boards and roles. And I know he's very interested in this. So I think that together we'll make some recommendations, but the first recommendation would be for people to begin familiarizing themselves to this. These are them, right? You brought them with you, so.
Yeah, this is
It's actually not
Is that double-sided or single-sided?
Double-sided.
Double-sided.
I would like to say paper, yes. So it's 144, no, I'm sorry, 245 pages.
Okay.
245 pages, so yeah. It's a lot of trees.
But it's half, it's double-sided.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
ask the finance committee a question.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Just kind of coattailing on Gilda's question originally. I know you said this is kind of broad and you want the entire bylaw section to be reviewed. Is there any, or are there any sections in particular that inspired you to craft this? Because if there's an area that we can start on, that might be the most efficient way to approach this, so if you have any input on that. I'd love to hear.
I am not exactly comfortable with sort of suggesting where to start. I know that, I can tell you for sure that Randy has some recommendations on things that he would look. I'm sure that, Jen does, I'm sure that Louis does. You know, I really think that that's what the committee needs to wrestle with, is to say, and I think you can do a scan, to be perfectly honest. You don't even need to like read every single thing in detail, you know, but I think maybe doing a first pass to look and say, yeah, I don't want to tell you how to approach your work, but I think, you know, looking at, you know, I think I actually think Tom also did a nice job of laying out, you know, what are those things that are really about governance and about, you know, policies and, you know, I don't feel like it's our job as a finance committee to tell this committee how to, prioritize, because there's a lot in there, you know, so that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't wanna ask you to tell us how to do our work. I was
Yeah,
just
sorry,
wondering if
Paul.
there was anything that particularly inspired you, but maybe I'll just redirect the
I
question.
mean, yeah, I mean, I think some of the things I might say, I'm guessing you'd hear from Randy as well.
Yeah,
So, again,
if anybody has any input on that now, maybe that would be.
Randy
just for a
said-
starting point.
Or Louis, one of you sent a whole exhaustive list of things, and I said, well, that's, we gotta get that from Louis, because that's all. You had a list, right? Yeah, but it was a list.
Yeah. But again, to touch upon the pieces, like Randy said, my approach was the top to bottom. Start at one and go through it. And you see, like was referenced, things that stick out. You know, knowing, being on the municipal side, again, another point that was raised, there are things that become pain points. So whether you work in municipal, whether you're coming from private, whether you're just a resident, there's something you would have interacted with over the years and say, I can't believe that is the answer I received, or I can't believe this is the process I have to follow, or is that really the only way we can do it? And if those things come to mind and we read through and we see, and yes, and there's a way to correct, revise, or alter an alternative, that's the process. That's the thing to look at. That's the thing to go through. So yeah, I went through, I have a document, I have different references in it. I have things we should add. I have things that are just questions. I have things that could be removed. Again, stuff that, you know, Jen and Tom and Cindy referenced already. There are plenty of things, George mentioned as well, that it's not there anymore. And so we still have a reference to it. The select board did it with their policies, traffic rules and regulations, that was done as well. You know, the last one, we still had angled parking in the downtown. We had a reference to the prior movie theater in the downtown. That was still in that section of that document for rules and regulations. So those are the things. Like if you take it, look through it, read it, think, it's like highlight it, question. So if you find areas that interest you, I think that's a great stepping off point. And then in our next meeting, we can start to discuss further of, okay, fine. Is it subcommittees for these parts? Is it a general discussion? However it falls out.
and I think if you don't, to the chair, well, you're on the chair, so you just. I think as you go through, there may be also things that rise to the top of urgency. You know, I mean, I know that there's potentially some issues that will be coming up around water and sewer commission. And that may be something that as you talk as a group, that there may be some discussion about why is that becoming an important issue. The electronic voting may be an important issue because if we're gonna do that for the town meeting in 2026, we've gotta have there's gonna be financial expenditures that are gonna need to be part of the budget that we approve at the town meeting in 2025. So there could be some things, and I'm just telling you things that come off the top of my head, not, you know, but I do think there will be some of that kind of thinking that that this group will need to start to consider. You know, are there things that we need to lay out earlier in order to be prepared for them? If in fact this committee decides that those are things that are gonna move forward. So that, you know, I do think there is some need for, you know, are there any issues with urgency in terms of things, issues that are coming forward for the town? Are there issues with budgetary implications, for example, that we need to, consider that if we're gonna propose a bylaw change, there's money that's gonna need to follow them in some way, and we need to sequence that, so sequencing could be a consideration. So those are just some things that are kind of coming to me off the top of my head. It's an important question, Paul, and I'm glad you framed it.
I also think you're gonna find that we're gonna get to sections where we're gonna have to invite some of those affected parties in to hear, all right, how can we make this better? You touched on water and sewer, but I probably imagine there's a lot of other areas where we would want to invite the individuals who either administer those bylaws or are legislated by those bylaws to say, if we were to, make these better or no changes, whatever the question is, but this shouldn't be a vacuum. We're not going to do this in a vacuum. I can't imagine. It would be impossible and unfair, and it would be a failure. So tonight was a really good example of, tasking you with this question, but I imagine other committees, including the select board, will want to weigh in and say, boy, if we had bylaws that helped us do this, it could be a lot better.
May I make a comment? I really appreciate your question, and I feel that it's very important that our town meeting work well, and that, the issue of electronic voting, the issue of making town meeting work, and then there are also the question of how can our governance be balanced in terms of the role of our town administrator being able to do his job. So those are just a couple of things that I wanted to mention so that we can really work well as a town and make sure that the job is getting done, the governance job is getting done, and that it's inclusive of the voice of the people.
Do you feel like something's not getting done now?
I think that there are probably places where decision-making that could potentially be spread away from the select board to the town administrator. I think there's some areas where things get bollocksed up, is my sense.
So move it from a consensus to a single individual.
Well, just,
No,
if I could give an example through the chair.
There's one thing I will interject in just a moment is we're also going to be very mindful of things that trigger charter versus, so if it affects the charter form, we're not going to go into those areas.
I understand.
We can advise, we'd say, we really think you need a strong town executive version of government, but we can't do that. We're not going to do that. Our task was clear relative to the bylaws, but in your preamble, you said, all right, there's parking lots, and those are things that, could go in the parking lot.
And where there's opportunity, and I don't know where it just becomes a matter of delegation, for example, but for example, our recreation department head, if he wants to hire a recreation department worker and he interviews somebody today, and our select board isn't, and he does all the query checks, our HR department does what they need to do, and our select board isn't meeting for 2 weeks, he can't hire that person because they have to be appointed by the select board. So that hire gets delayed for a minimum wage or just a little bit above minimum wage hire, who now could maybe get a job at Target tomorrow and start 2 days later. So that kind of a thing, that needs a hire, that hire has to get approved by our select board. You hear them all the time if you go to a select board meeting. So that's a very non-controversial issue, and, but there are those kinds of things right now. Those maybe can get delegated, they may not need any bylaw change. But I think some of, and I'm doing sort of a low-level example. But there are those kinds of things that you see. If you watch a select board meeting and you look at the number of appoint Sue Smith, change the EPAth for Joe Johnson, you see how many of those are on a select board agenda on any given meeting. There's a lot of
This
them.
town structure relative to personnel board changed over the years as well, and those are things that in other communities would be handled through a personnel board or through rank and file HR director who has the power, and so that will be in the bylaws. We'll sort of see where that is, and if we can, and we think we want to recommend a fix, we can do that, or we can say it doesn't belong here. We're just going to have to kick that can.
Do you have a copy of the charter?
Yeah, it's interesting. Wow. So I did, it's a parchment on the wall.
It says Canton's established.
I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding.
Is it the town clerk's office?
Yeah, it's hanging on the town clerk. There's a copy in the town clerk's office framed in old English writing, right? And I thought they were joking, and because I tried to get a copy, they said, well, there it is. I said, what? It wasn't printed anywhere. No, and then I double checked, and then with the library, we have one hanging there, and at the Historical Society, we have one hanging there, and that's the charter.
Wow.
But it's really broad, and this is not unusual for New England towns to have sort of started with a
No,
charter.
certainly, yeah.
But now that we're a multi-million-dollar corporation guided by this piece of paper that was written in 1797, it's starting.
Yes.
Yeah, it's causing issues. But that won't be for us, but it's
Sometimes it's helpful to know what you shouldn't touch or can't touch
not touching that.
through
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think
That's the
that,
only reason I wanted.
it's funny too. I'm old enough to remember there was a charter commission in the 1980s that was convened by Michael Curran. If you remember Michael Curran, who was town council, anybody remember Michael? And they sort of hemmed and hawed, and his vision was much more expansive in terms of how we would change government. And that committee never really got very far as a result. And it was, again, it was the 1980s. They took notice. I've been looking for the notes of that committee or any reference to that committee, but I do remember the meeting and reporting, and it just went nowhere.
George, I can't believe you don't have it.
I know. Well, I have the charter. I'll bring a copy next time and you'll see it. It's quite fun.
It's our first point of business to generate a PDF.
Bring a PDF. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, one tool that may help the group, and we'll go back to Mr. McCall's question, there is a table of contents in the back of the current set of bylaws.
It's on the back.
Yeah, so don't get discouraged. There is an organization that's in the
Right,
document.
it's up here. So these are all the codified changes
they
in
got
the
all the
legislative
changes
history
in it.
that's in the back.
They get all-
I did print it.
Did you? Yeah.
That's great.
And yeah,
Oh, right.
So I'm waiting for my employees.
So that-
to
Also
leave.
known as table.
No, the index, it's table index, but it is.
Oh, okay.
Oh, so the index is at the back.
That may be one way to help skin cat right there.
Please go look at Sharon's.
This is not a search.
Please go look at Sharon's.
I mean, it's a PDF, so I mean, if you went, you know.
Yeah.
Other questions or any comments for this evening?
They'll find.
Yeah.
So just
Okay,
as
so it's not-
someone who's worked
Yeah,
on town
sure,
committees,
so-
it is my experience that if somebody needs to not burn out their personal printer, that someone at town hall will print a copy for you.
That's
So
fine.
I'm sure
Yeah,
if you
I
can.
did mine on the printer rather than my copier this morning.
So, I didn't, maybe didn't need to be said, but I just.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Do we need to set an agenda?
I'm
A
going to
standing
propose
agenda?
an agenda with Mike Claughton together. We're going to propose the next agenda based on tonight's discussion that will get us started. There will, there'll always be, there won't be a standing agenda. It's going to have to change because I think the work that we're going to do is changeable. But I want to work with Michael and get that together. I also want to ask you all to continue to avail yourselves to us as we work through this. I think rather than us being in a feedback loop and other committees in the community that we can draw upon for their expertise, and your expertise was particularly helpful this evening, and I hope you'll continue with that. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Made and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned at 8:30. Thank you all for being here.
We can go get that.